It was an ordinary afternoon when Daniel walked into the small pawn shop in the city center. He was looking for an antique piece to restore, something that could occupy his free time and satisfy his curiosity for objects from the past. The place was dark and filled with knickknacks, each item carrying its own forgotten and silent story. As he explored the shelves, one object caught his attention: an old pocket watch with an intricate design and a mysterious aura. The piece had gold details and a glass dial that revealed elegantly crafted hands. It was beautiful and at the same time unsettling. Daniel picked it up and felt a chill as he opened the lid, revealing a worn dial that still seemed to keep perfect time. "Interested?" asked Mr. Gouveia, the shop owner, emerging from the back of the aisle with an enigmatic smile. He was an elderly man with eyes that seemed to carry deep, silent knowledge. "This watch has a fascinating history. They say it has belonged to several people over the years." Daniel looked at the watch, intrigued. "What's so special about it?" he asked, unaware that this simple question would change everything. Mr. Gouveia shrugged, as if it were nothing special. "Some say it shows more than just the time, but you know how legends are. If you're interested, I can give you a good price." Thinking it was just another story to sell the product, Daniel accepted the offer and took the watch home. He couldn't explain it, but there was something about the object that attracted him, something that made him want to know more about its history. As soon as he arrived at his apartment, he placed the watch on his workbench and began cleaning it, eager to discover what lay behind that old and enigmatic piece. That night, after restoring and adjusting the watch, Daniel watched the hands move with precision. The constant ticking filled the silence of the apartment, creating a hypnotic rhythm. He placed the watch on the nightstand before going to sleep, still curious about the stories Mr. Gouveia had mentioned, but not giving them much importance. While sleeping, Daniel had a vivid dream, unlike anything he had ever experienced. He found himself on a street he didn't recognize, illuminated only by the headlights of a car speeding toward him. There was the sound of screeching tires, a scream, and then an impact. The scene was so real that he could feel the adrenaline rushing through his veins, as if he were there, witnessing everything firsthand. He woke up abruptly, gasping for breath, with the sound of the watch ticking beside him. Trying to calm his racing heart, he got up and went to the kitchen to drink a glass of water. On his way back, he stopped to look at the watch. That's when he noticed something strange. The hands were spinning faster than they should, as if trying to reach something. Intrigued, he picked up the watch and watched the hands slow down and return to their normal pace. The next day, while having breakfast, Daniel heard on the radio a news report that left him perplexed. An accident had occurred in the early morning, exactly as he had seen in his dream. The description of the location, the car, and even the time of the accident matched what he had witnessed during the night. He felt a chill run through his body and looked at the watch, which was on the table, seemingly harmless. Daniel tried to dismiss the idea that the dream and the accident were connected, but the coincidence was hard to ignore. He thought about going back to the shop to return the watch, but a morbid curiosity held him back. Maybe it's just a coincidence, he told himself, trying to rationalize what had happened. But deep down, something told him that the watch was not just an ordinary object, and that things were only beginning to get strange. In the following days, Daniel tried to follow his normal routine, but the watch seemed to draw him in a way he couldn't explain. Every time he heard the rhythmic ticking, he felt an urgency to look at the object, as if it held answers to questions he didn't even know he had. However, the visions didn't stop. They became more frequent and disturbing, occurring not only during sleep, but also at random moments throughout the day. In one of the visions, he found himself inside a burning apartment, feeling the heat and hearing the sound of sirens in the distance. The scene was so intense that he almost fell out of his chair when the vision ended. Daniel began to notice a pattern. The tragedies he saw materialized within a few hours, and no matter what he tried to do to distract himself, the images kept returning, each time clearer and more detailed. Determined to try to interfere with one of the visions, he wrote down all the details he could remember: the location, the time, and even a license plate he managed to see during the vision of the accident. On the same day, he went to the place he had visualized and waited, hoping to prevent the tragedy from happening. But when he arrived, there was no sign of danger, just a quiet and peaceful street. He began to think he might be imagining everything, that the visions were just a product of his tired mind. However, just a few minutes later, he heard the sound of a crash and saw the accident unfold right before his eyes, exactly as he had predicted. Daniel rushed to try to help the victims, but chaos ensued, and he ended up being pushed back by the crowd that formed around the scene. When the sirens arrived, he stood on the sidewalk, looking at the watch and feeling a sense of helplessness. Back in his apartment, Daniel couldn't shake the thought that the watch was playing with him. He tried to disable it, remove the batteries, and even stop the hands manually, but nothing seemed to work. The watch continued to keep time as if it had a mind of its own, and the continuous ticking made his head throb. The visions were a puzzle, and he was determined to understand how they worked. But the more he tried, the more he felt himself losing grip in his own despair, and the line between what was real and what was just a vision began to blur. Desperate for answers, Daniel decided to seek help from Helena, an old friend who worked as a historian. He knew that if anyone could help him understand the origin of the watch and its bizarre properties, it would be her. At first, Helena thought he was exaggerating or just going through a stressful phase. But upon hearing the detailed descriptions of the visions and the coincidences, she realized something was wrong. "Are you saying you can see the future?" she asked, trying to find logic in what seemed impossible. Daniel just nodded, his eyes tired and desperate. "I don't know how to explain it, Helena. I see tragedies before they happen, but I can't change anything. Everything unfolds exactly as I see it." Curious, Helena agreed to help investigate. They decided to return to the pawn shop where Daniel had bought the watch to try to uncover more about its history. However, Mr. Gouveia was unavailable when they arrived, and an employee said he had left town for a few days. With few options, Helena suggested they research in local libraries and archives to see if there was any reference to a watch with such properties. After a few hours of research, Helena found something that caught her attention: mentions of an ancient artifact known as the Clock of Destiny. According to the documents, the watch had been created centuries ago by a watchmaker obsessed with the idea of predicting the future. It was believed that the object had been imbued with a kind of temporal knowledge after a ritual the watchmaker performed, supposedly to see what would happen in the coming years. However, the people who possessed the watch became obsessed and eventually went mad because they couldn't change the events they saw. Helena looked at Daniel with concern. "It seems the watch is not just an old object, Daniel. It's a trap. It shows the future in a way you can't control. And this has driven people insane for centuries." Daniel felt a lump in his throat upon hearing this. He wanted answers, but it seemed each discovery only confirmed his worst fears. "So, how can we get rid of it?" he asked, his voice almost pleading. Helena hesitated before responding. "The issue isn't just getting rid of the watch, Daniel. From what these stories suggest, the watch isn't something you simply dispose of. It finds a new bearer. We need to understand how it works and maybe how to stop this cycle." Although Helena's words brought a bit of hope, Daniel couldn't help but feel he was entering a one-way path where the more he understood the watch, the more trapped he became by it. In the days that followed, Daniel's obsession with the watch only grew. He spent hours studying the object, trying to decipher its patterns, gazing at the hands, waiting for new visions. Helena continued her research, but the answers weren't coming quickly enough to soothe Daniel's growing anxiety. Meanwhile, Sophia, his wife, began to notice that something was wrong. At first, she tried to ignore it, thinking he was just dealing with a difficult phase at work. But the situation worsened. Daniel became increasingly isolated, avoiding conversations, losing sleep, and refusing to leave the house. Concerned, Sophia decided to confront him. "Daniel, what's going on? You're not the same anymore. I see you talking to yourself, staring at that watch for hours. You need to tell me what's happening?" Daniel hesitated, knowing the truth would sound absurd. But he saw no other way but to tell her. "Sophia, I know this will sound strange, but the watch, it shows me things that are going to happen. I can see the future." Sophia's incredulous look was enough for him to realize how crazy it all seemed. "I know how it sounds, but it's true. I try to change the things I saw, but everything happens the same way. I don't know what to do anymore." Sophia remained silent for a moment, processing what he was saying. "Daniel, I think you're letting this consume you. Maybe you're projecting, imagining things. You need help, but not this kind," she said, trying to stay calm. "It could just be a coincidence or your mind playing tricks on you. But if you keep going like this, you'll end up losing yourself." Sophia's reaction shook him. Part of him wanted to believe she was right, that it was all a construct of his stressed mind. But he also knew the visions were real, and trying to ignore them wouldn't make them disappear. "You don't understand," he murmured, his voice wavering. "I'm not crazy. I need to figure out how this works before it's too late." The argument ended in heavy silence, and Sophia withdrew to the bedroom, leaving Daniel alone with a watch on the table, the ticking echoing through the empty room. She wanted to help but didn't know how, fearing that any attempt to make him give up would only push him further away. Daniel, in turn, felt he was losing control of everything: his marriage, his life, and his own sanity. But the watch kept time, impassive, as if waiting for the next move. Daniel couldn't get Sophia's words out of his head. He knew his obsession with the watch was intensifying, but he couldn't simply ignore what was happening. Determined to obtain more concrete answers, he returned to the pawn shop, hoping to find Mr. Gouveia. If anyone knew more about the watch and how it worked, it would be him. Upon arrival, he found the shop empty, except for the sound of the doorbell announcing his entry. Daniel began to think that maybe Mr. Gouveia was avoiding talking to him. But shortly after, the man appeared, coming out of a back room with the same enigmatic smile as before. "Ah, you came back," said Mr. Gouveia, as if he had been expecting it. "I knew you would return." Daniel didn't want to waste time. "What do you know about this watch?" he asked directly. "Don't give me vague stories. I want the truth. What is it and how does it do what it does?" Mr. Gouveia observed him for a moment, his smile fading, and he seemed to ponder whether to reveal more than he had already said. "You're not the first to ask that," he began calmly. "This watch is old, much older than it seems. It has belonged to several people, each fascinated by the idea of controlling time, of seeing what's to come. But what they didn't realize is that the watch doesn't show the future to be changed. It shows the inevitable." Mr. Gouveia's words left Daniel perplexed. "So you knew? You knew what it did and still sold it to me?" The man nodded, without a hint of remorse. "Yes, because the watch chooses its owners. I'll just facilitate things. Do you think it was a coincidence that you came here and found it? Nothing is by chance with this watch." Daniel felt a mix of anger and despair. "I need to get rid of it. I need to break this cycle," he exclaimed, but Mr. Gouveia shook his head. "The watch isn't something you simply discard. It remains because time remains. And as long as there are those who wish to know the future, it will find a bearer." Daniel felt powerless, as if trapped in a maze with no exit. He thought about destroying the watch, but looking at Mr. Gouveia, he realized that wouldn't be enough. "So what do I do? How do I get out of this?" he asked, his voice full of desperation. Mr. Gouvier gave a slight smile that seemed to mix sympathy and pity. You can try to stop the watch, but know that it will always find a way to continue. The only choice you have is to understand that some things are inevitable, and to accept what you see instead of trying to change it. His words hung in the air like a sentence, leaving Daniel even more confused and disturbed. He left the shop with the watch firmly in his hand, the sound of the hands echoing in his head like a constant reminder of his helplessness. He didn't know if he could accept what the watch showed, but he also had no idea how to free himself from its influence. After the disturbing conversation with Mr. Gouvier, Daniel returned home, but couldn't escape the feeling that the watch was becoming a part of his life in an insidious and uncontrollable way. He tried to focus on other things, but the sound of the hands seemed to echo louder each day, as if the watch was deliberately trying to grab his attention. Then the visions changed. They were no longer distant tragedies involving strangers or accidents he saw in the news the next day. Now, they were personal. Daniel began to see images of Sophia, quick and fragmented scenes of something terrible that seemed to be about to happen. He saw glimpses of her alone, with a panicked expression, followed by the sound of shattering glass and darkness. The fear that something bad could happen to her paralyzed him. Desperate, he tried to warn Sophia, but his attempts only increased the distance between them. She was already worried about his obsessive behavior, and his vague warnings about something bad that could happen left her even more confused and frustrated. "Daniel, you're losing yourself in this," she said, trying to find a way to reach him. "I want to help, but you need to help yourself too. You can't keep going like this." But Daniel couldn't simply ignore the visions, especially now that they involved Sophia. He started following her discreetly, trying to ensure that nothing bad happened to her, like an invisible bodyguard. His mind was consumed by the idea of preventing the tragedy he saw from coming true, and it began to affect his perception of what was real and what was just a vision. Nights became even more unbearable. Daniel began having repetitive and increasingly vivid dreams, in which he saw Sophia in danger, surrounded by shards of glass and indistinct shadows. He woke up in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, only to find the watch beside his bed, ticking relentlessly. He tried to stop the hands, remove parts of the mechanism, but nothing worked. The watch kept ticking as if mocking his efforts. One day, while trying to sleep, a vision suddenly came with more clarity than any before. He saw Sophia in their kitchen, the sound of glass breaking, and then a flash of light. It was different from the previous visions, so sharp it seemed to be happening at that very moment. Without thinking, Daniel rushed downstairs to the kitchen and found Sophia standing there, perplexed, with a broken jar on the floor. She looked at him, scared by his desperate expression. "Daniel, what are you doing?" she asked, but he could barely respond, his hands trembling as he tried to explain that he had seen what had just happened. To him, this was a sign. The vision had come true, and if he didn't find a way to deal with it, worse things could happen. But the vision also brought another truth. He had no control over what he saw, and the more he tried, the more he seemed to lose himself in the chaos of possibilities the watch presented. Each passing day left Daniel more exhausted and lost. The visions of Sophia were becoming more intense, and he felt he was constantly on the verge of a breakdown. Helena, who had been following the deterioration of his mental state, decided to visit him after a long absence. She knew she needed to do something before he was completely consumed by obsession. When she arrived at Daniel's apartment, she was shocked by what she saw. The place was disorganized, as if a hurricane had passed through. There were scattered papers, frantic scribbles of notes, and in the center of it all, the watch still ticking with its relentless precision. Daniel was sitting near the window, his eyes hollow and tired, fixed on the watch as if waiting for it to reveal a secret he still couldn't decipher. "Daniel, this needs to stop," Helena said, her voice soft but firm. "I understand the watch is showing you things, but you're losing yourself in it. You can't keep living like this. You need to step away, find a way to move forward without it." Daniel looked at her, and for a moment his expression softened, as if struggling against the temptation to agree. "I know it seems crazy, Helena, but I saw things. And now I'm seeing something happening to Sophia. I can't just ignore it. If I can figure out how the watch works, maybe I can prevent something bad from happening." Helena approached and held his hands, trying to bring him back to reality. "But that's what the watch does, Daniel. It shows you what's going to happen because it wants you to try to change it, to trap you in an endless cycle of despair. I found more information while you were here, and every person who possessed this watch tried to do the same thing you are. All failed. You can't change the future it shows." Daniel let go of her hands, looking away. "So what do I do? Accept that things are going to happen and just stand by, waiting? I can't do that. Not if it means something could hurt Sophia." His voice broke, and Helena saw how devastated he was. She knew he was sinking deeper and feared there was no turning back if he kept trying to fight what the watch showed. "You need to get rid of it," she insisted. "I know Mr. Gouveia said the watch always finds a new bearer, but if you keep going like this, you'll destroy yourself. I can help. We can try to hide the watch, put it somewhere it can't reach you." But Daniel shook his head, his eyes fixed on the hands that seemed to move with cruel precision. "I can't just leave it behind. If I do, and something bad happens, I'll never forgive myself." He was trapped, not by a rational choice, but by the fear that if he didn't try, he would be failing in a way he couldn't bear. Helena sighed, resigned, knowing her words might not be enough to save him. "Then, just promise me you'll be careful, Daniel. And if you realize you can't do anything else, that you're destroying yourself, find a way to let it go. Because the watch won't let you go on its own." After Helena left, Daniel looked at the watch once more, listening to the incessant ticking that seemed to mock his helplessness. Helena's words echoed in his mind, but so did the vision of Sophia in danger. He knew the watch was pushing him to the limit, but he couldn't stop because stopping meant accepting fate, and that was a price too high for him. Night fell over Daniel's apartment, and the darkness seemed to swallow every corner of the room, except for the soft glow of the watch, which kept time relentlessly. He knew he was on the verge of a breakdown, but he couldn't step away. The visions came and went, each one seeming closer and more personal. He saw Sophia repeatedly, the scenes mixed and distorted, as if the watch was toying with his mind, trying to push him beyond his limits. In a moment of pure desperation, Daniel grabbed the watch and threw it against the wall. Hoping it would break, the hands would stop moving, the sound would cease. But the watch fell to the floor intact, still keeping time with precision, the ticking echoing through the room. He grabbed a hammer and tried to smash it, but each blow seemed to be absorbed by the object, causing no damage. The visions returned, violent and frantic. He saw one last scene that made him freeze. Sophia, standing in front of their bedroom mirror, an expression of fear and surprise. The glass around her shattered, scattered across the floor, and a blinding light illuminating the scene. He didn't know what it meant, but the vision was too clear, too detailed to ignore. Daniel rushed upstairs, breathless, desperate to reach Sophia before it was too late. When he entered the bedroom, he found her exactly where he had seen her in the vision, standing in front of the mirror with wide eyes and trembling hands. "Daniel, what's happening?" she asked, but before he could respond, the sound of the watch reverberated in the room, even though he had left the object in the living room. He looked around, trying to understand where the sound was coming from, and then saw the faint light reflected in the mirror. Moving closer slowly, he realized that the reflection in the mirror was distorted, showing not just the room, but something beyond, a darkness that seemed to stretch infinitely. The sound of the watch echoed, and the reflected hands seemed to move at a different pace, almost as if they were showing a parallel time, an overlapping reality. Daniel understood in that moment that the watch was not just an object. It was a portal to something much bigger, something that played with the perception of time and reality. "Sophia, get away from there," he whispered, pulling her away from the mirror. But their reflections remained, as if they were stuck between two worlds, and the ticking sound grew louder, more insistent. With tears in his eyes, Daniel grabbed the watch from the living room and held it tightly. He knew he couldn't destroy it, but he needed to do something to break the cycle. He returned to the bedroom and, looking into the mirror, made a decision. "If you want someone, take me," he said, looking directly at the distorted reflection. "But leave Sophia alone." For a moment, time seemed to stop. The ticking ceased, and the room was engulfed in oppressive silence. Then, the watch's hands began to spin frantically, faster than ever, until Daniel felt the object heat up in his hands. He held on tightly, even as the heat became almost unbearable. The light in the mirror exploded into a flash, and Daniel was thrown back, hitting the floor. When he stood up, the room was normal again, the mirror intact and without distorted reflections. The watch in his hands, however, was stopped. For the first time since he found it, the hands didn't move, and the ticking had finally ceased. Sophia approached him, confused and scared, but he just smiled, relieved, as tears rolled down his face. "I think it's over," he whispered, unsure if it was truly true or just a pause in the endless cycle. The days that followed were silent and almost unreal. For the first time in weeks, Daniel didn't hear the watch's ticking. He still kept it stored away, but now the hands were stopped, frozen in a moment that seemed eternal. Sophia was relieved to see him calmer, although she didn't know exactly what had happened that night. To her, it might have been just a strange and confusing episode, something that had finally ended. However, Daniel knew the watch wasn't an ordinary object that could be forgotten so easily. He still felt its weight, like a presence that never fully left him. But for now, it seemed the object had ceased its manipulations, and that was enough for him. After a few weeks of trying to return to a normal routine, Daniel decided he couldn't keep the watch. He knew what Mr. Gouveia had said about the object always finding a new bearer, and feared what could happen if the watch decided to awaken again. Unsure of exactly what to do, he returned to the pawn shop to return the watch, hoping that somehow this would end the story. When he entered the shop, Mr. Gouveia was behind the counter, as if he knew Daniel would come back. "Ah, I see you've finally made your decision," he said, with a smile that mixed understanding and melancholy. Daniel placed the watch on the counter and pushed it toward Mr. Gouveia. "I can't keep this anymore," he said, his voice tired. "Do whatever you want, but I need this to end." Mr. Gouveia looked at the watch, then at Daniel, and nodded slowly. "I understand, but know that the watch doesn't choose its bearers by chance. Maybe for now, it has ended with you. But time is a cycle, and cycles always repeat." Daniel felt a chill at those words, but said nothing. He just wanted to get rid of the object and forget everything he had been through. Mr. Gouveia placed the watch in a small wooden box and put it back on a dark shelf at the back of the shop. Daniel watched, hoping to feel some relief seeing it put away, but the discomfort lingered, like a shadow that wouldn't disappear. "You did what you could, and that's all anyone can do," Mr. Gouveia said. "But remember, Daniel, time cannot be controlled, only accepted. And for some, acceptance is the hardest thing of all." Daniel left the shop without looking back, determined to try to rebuild his life and forget everything the watch had shown him. But he knew it wouldn't be that simple. The images still haunted his mind, and the fear that something might happen to Sophia never fully disappeared. He tried to comfort himself with the idea that the watch was now stored away and that perhaps it would never awaken again. A few weeks later, a young woman entered the pawn shop. She was distracted, browsing the old items that filled the place until something caught her attention. A small pocket watch, kept in a wooden box, rested on the shelf. She picked it up, admiring the elegant design and the comforting weight in her hands. "Interesting. I've never seen one like this before," she remarked casually. Mr. Gouveia appeared on the other side of the counter, smiling knowingly. "Ah, a rare piece full of stories," he said. "Would you like to hear more?" The young woman nodded, intrigued, and Mr. Gouveia began to tell an old story, as if reciting a tale of forgotten memories. The clock of destiny had found its next bearer, and the cycle was ready to begin again.